Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Judy Olian, and we're hosting The Way Forward. Welcome, everyone, on the future of digital entertainment. I am joined by my colleague, Fritz Stoudemire, who is the chair of film, television, and media arts at Quinnipiac University. His previous experience includes being a story analyst for Disney, working into Nickelodeon shows. He's written a biopic on Orson Welles and directed a documentary on Ernest Hemingway and some short films that have garnered quite a few awards. Our guests tonight are two terrific leaders in the entertainment industry and specifically in digital entertainment. Mike Hopkins, who joined Amazon in February 2020 as the Senior Vice President for Prime Video and Amazon Studios, where he oversees all of the entertainment products of Amazon. Previously, he served as chairman of Sony Pictures. He oversaw all television distribution and marketing for Sony. And he also served as the CEO of Hulu, and before that at Fox. And I learned today that his first job was working as a sales guy for the Penny Saver. So welcome, Mike.
Nice to be here. Thanks, Judy.
And Anne Sweeney. Anne is a member of the board at Netflix and at Lego, a member of the board of trustees of the Mayo Clinic and Getty, Dean's Distinguished Fellow at Harvard University's Graduate School of Education. Most recently, Anne was the co-chair of Disney Media Networks and president of Disney ABC Television Group, which includes Disney's global entertainment and news television properties, the owned television stations, the group and radio and publishing businesses. She led the industry into the digital era when Disney ABC became the first media company to put television content on new platforms, specifically on iTunes, around, I think, 2005. And she's garnered many, many awards every year, named the most powerful woman in entertainment by the Hollywood Reporter, one of the 50 most powerful women in business of Fortune, and same with Forbes. So welcome, Anne. And thank you both for being here for what I think will be a wonderful conversation. I welcome all of our audiences to register their questions on the chat function just at the bottom of your screen. Please go to the chat function. I can't promise I'll ask every question, or Fritz will because of time. And sometimes our executives, Mike and Anne, won't be able to answer every question because of their business relationships. But we'll try and get to everything, and Fritz and I will certainly pose some of the first few questions. So I'll start and ask you, as two iconic leaders in media and entertainment. So here we are in what I hope is the post-COVID era. Will audiences continue to watch their favorite movies and TV shows on mobile devices and at home rather than going to theaters? And please start.
Thank you, Judy, and hello, everyone. You know, COVID, I think, was an interesting time for digital media. And if it did nothing else, it emphasized how much we want to be connected to entertainment and how much we need it. I think now that we are hopefully in the post-COVID era, I think people will be picking and choosing differently. There will be times when they feel they really need to be in the theater to have the experience that they want with a movie. And there'll be other times when it simply isn't convenient, or it's more convenient or more attractive for them to watch it at home on a device.
Hi.
Yeah, I agree with Ann on that. I think, I think customers and consumers have wanted more choice and flexibility about how they watch their film and TV for a long time. And gosh, over the last 20 years, we've seen that just increase their, not only their desire, but their ability to do so. If you go back and look at, DVRs coming out in the early 2000s, and then you've got the free streaming and SVOD and all the cord cutting that's happening with customers sort of voting with their feet. I think there's just this craving for a consumer's ability to choose what they want to watch and where they would like to watch it and at what time they'd like to watch it. And so I think that's already been happening. And I think the pandemic certainly pulled a lot of that behavior forward quite a bit. But as Ann said, I think as things are starting to ease and people are going back outside and going to restaurants and theaters and theme parks and sporting events, I think the digital entertainment will probably abate a little bit in the home, but I think we're gonna come out of this at a higher baseline, if you will. I think they've changed. They've more people that are engaging in digital entertainment than they ever have before, and I think that's going to be with us for a long time.
And is it going to be a digital first strategy for the studios, for the entertainment companies? Is that going to be permanent, where the distribution is really geared towards digital? Mike?
No, I think a lot of companies have been thinking about this for a long time. And just before the pandemic, we had 2 or 3 really big streaming services launch, and then a couple more at the beginning of the pandemic. So this movement's been there, and it's been there for a while. But I definitely think it's just as consumer behavior has accelerated. I think the investment by media companies in digital also has accelerated through the pandemic, and so I think that for digital first mindset and strategy is there for sure. And I think it's just a natural evolution, probably, accelerated by the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'd add what's one of the things that's been interesting is watching how people are consuming content. Sometimes they have every single episode of every season available to them, and they'll choose to watch only one episode instead of 20, in one gulp. And given the slowdowns that everyone experienced during COVID and trying to get things produced, many of the streamers are introducing one new episode per week of a show. And I think, watching people's behavior and how they're consuming now versus a couple of years ago when it was all about binging will be interesting to track in the years ahead.
Fritz?
Yeah, thanks, Judy. So Mike and Ann, my question is, what are your thoughts about the choice between producing movies versus episodic series? It's been kind of a revelation to many during COVID, the opportunity to really get to know characters over the course of a season and multiple seasons. But how do you see studios choosing between films and series in the future?
I think it really depends on the property and the writer that you have on that specific property. I mean, some things, are just movies. They are that story. They need to be told in that format. And other things, while they may be a series, they may only be 6 or 8 episodes long. So I think the content really determines, from my perspective, what format it will take.
Thanks. Mike, do you have any?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think some stories just want to be told a certain way, and how the writer wants to tell it. I also think consumers have changed a little as well, just given the fact that if you look at just the number of shows being produced today, I don't know what the increase has been over the last 5 or 6 years, but I'm sure it's tripled at least. And so I think the number of choices that people have for TV has become a little bit overwhelming. And I think you can only make so many sort of relationships with shows at a time. And I think viewers want the choice between getting engaged in something that might be a longer arc versus something I can just consume in a couple of hours. And I think that films are just going to play a bigger role as a result of that, maybe a little bit more than they have in the past.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, I guess I kind of, anecdotally, I've actually it's interesting. I work with a lot of our screenwriters, and I have been seeing a few more series being written for senior projects over the last few years. So that's interesting. That I think it's going to swing back to film. I can see that. So, okay, how do you determine whether to invest in one project over another? Because obviously you guys are getting so many projects and scripts pitched. What analytics do you use, or is it gut checks and reactions, when you're kind of looking at something that might be a critical success or an audience success, like a Handmaid's Tale or Bridgerton, versus something that might totally miss? I know the film students are, what are you all looking for in that respect?
I think this is probably a better question for Mike because he's hands-on. Unfortunately, board members do not get to pick what shows go on.
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, I think depending on the day, right?
Right.
I have to say, and this is not just because Anne is on this with us today, but I actually learned a lot about this from Anne. I think you when you're running one of these things, you have to have a strategy, right? You have to have a strategy around what you're doing with your programming. And the reason why I say that is there's so many projects that get pitched every day. Our creative teams say no to like 95% of the things that come in the door, right? Or is a pass. And so when I say strategy, I think you have to think about, well, what are you trying to do with your customers, and what about the customers you want to acquire in the future? And give your creative teams a framework to think through what are the things that should be in the consideration set. I actually think in 2021 and beyond, when you're in streaming, the job's gotten a lot harder. Back in the last 20, 25 years, when cable networks and broadcast networks were really what people were programming, they were much easier to think about. They were hard, don't get me wrong, but if you're programming the Comedy Central network, or you're programming Nickelodeon, or you're programming the Food Network, a lot of your strategy work is kind of done before you start, right? We're going after comedy or food or kids programming. With these broad-based SVOD services, each of us, Netflix and Prime, have over 200 million customers around the world. So there's a lot of tastes out there. You have a lot of customers around in different geographies that you're trying to serve. And so really segmenting your customers, really trying to figure out who are you trying to reach, what kinds of things are they interested in, is really important. But hits matter, right? This is a hit-driven business. So, many things that you want to do, like the ones you just mentioned, transcend a lot of different customer segments. And so you want to have a strategy that gives your creative folks kind of a checklist or a rubric to think through. But at the same time, you want to empower them to take big swings and take some risks. But you have to have some idea about who you're trying to reach with those.
So this is a question from the audience. Sorry, Anne, go ahead. I was going to follow up with a question from the audience, but please do.
Oh, no, I was just going to tack on to Mike. One of the things, and it's been reported, Squid Game was a show that was developed and produced in Korea. And what's interesting about that the Netflix philosophy of, shows that are produced outside of the US is that they have to be good for the home country. It's not about globalized television and television by global committee. It really has to resonate in its home territory.
So back to this notion of appealing to a broader audience as Netflix or Amazon, and yet having hits ultimately. So Andrea is asking, why do you think so many film and TV studios are producing movies and shows based on existing series or remakes rather than original ideas? And I'm following up. Is it because of the risk profile here, that you want to maximize the chance of a hit rather than a miss? And you want to take that?
I found this to be an interesting, I don't know if it's a new trend, but it's certainly a trend that has accelerated. And it's a great question. I think on one hand, you have proven IP. And second to that, there's a reason to remake it. Is it because, first time through, it was appropriate to the 60s. Is there a reason to make it now? Because, you're able to make it even better. That this was already great IP to start with, but somehow remaking it will, make it resonate even more deeply with the audience.
Yeah, and I guess to follow up on that, kind of what I was saying before about the number of shows and films that are out there and the choices customers have is so vast now that I think a lot of times if you're wanting to take a big bet on something, it's somewhat easier to try to land something that's people have heard of before. It's easier to market something that has a brand or something that people have seen before. So I think you do try to find those things that make sense to do. I also think candidly, it's probably just a little bit easier for creative executives. So it's a little bit of it's less risky in their mind if they take a bet on something that's pre-existing versus coming out with something creative and new. I look at my job as trying to push the teams to do both because you can't just be a remake factory, if you will. But you have to try and find new stories and create the IP of the future for your company or for your studio. So I think that's part of it.
Thanks. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, but I am encouraging people to put their questions in the Q&A because we'll get to them, I promise. There has been a lot of consolidation and continuing mega consolidation in the entertainment industry. We've seen Warner Brothers Discovery with a $43 billion acquisition. The recently announced Amazon acquisition of MGM for $8.45 billion. I'm not asking you to comment specifically about the Amazon acquisition because of business reasons, but do you see this consolidation trend as a trend that's going to continue? And do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I see it as companies in search of IP, companies in search of more content, because streaming services, in my mind, are a much hungrier proposition than broadcast networks ever were. With a streaming service, there's an expectation that you will have a lot of choice. You will have a lot of series. You're going to have a lot of movies. You're going to have, and some will have live television. So I think really not just a race to create a huge library of content for people, which also, you have to justify your price point, but it also gives you IP, which, as we were just discussing with Remakes, it gives you the opportunity, to, dive back into some shows that aren't particularly relevant now, but remake them in a way that could really resonate with an audience and delight them.
We'll skip you, Mike, on that one.
Sure. Well, I could just say it more broadly. Obviously, I can't comment on the MGM acquisition, but when you just look at the publicly reported data around what people watch in streaming, you just look at the amount of library series and library television that gets consumed, older films, et cetera. And I think a lot of streaming services benefit by having, as Zan said, a big, deep library and well of content for their customers. And, as some of the larger media companies have kind of gone all into streaming, a lot of that content's not available anymore for the more independent streamers to acquire. So yeah, I think you're going to start to see. My bet is you'll see more consolidation over the next couple of years. You're getting to a place where not that many places to be, not that many left. But I think those that are, I think everyone will probably have to have a hard look at whether they stay in this or whether they do let themselves get acquired.
Yeah, that's right. I think aren't there over 200 streamers right now?
Yeah.
I'll name, the big 4 or 5, but beyond that, it's tough. So we'll see what happens there.
Fred? I'm sorry, Fritz.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm So Netflix has had a string of foreign language and international hit series: Squid Games, like you mentioned, Money Heist, Bridgerton, Narcos. Is subscriber growth into international markets driving the content choices? We addressed that to some extent, but
Yeah, I talked a little bit about being important to the home country, but I think an important part of their strategy is, not just gaining subscribers, but also gaining stories and, having the platform to tell the stories in these home countries, because that is really what attracts new subscribers. Sure, they're interested in, certain parts of the library, but seeing yourself, reflected on the screen, seeing the stories that you grew up with or stories that are created, by writers in a region is a very, very powerful thing.
Yeah, and I'd second that. I think for us, I think you'll see us. If I were to guess, I think 2-3 years from now, we'll be making 3 to 4 times as many original shows and films in local language around the country, around the world, than we are out of our U.S. Studio. And I think that's just going to accelerate over time for the reasons that Anne described.
are there any specific international markets that that either of your companies are targeting in the future? I don't know if China is on the table in the future, or
China is so hard. China is very difficult with the rules and regulations. That's a tough one.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I can't really sort of talk specifically about any future expansions that we're going to be doing, but I think we're going to be aggressive in terms of rolling out around the world. We're already in every country with Prime Video, as Netflix is with Netflix, except for China. And I think as we go forward, we'll be launching in new countries. When I say launching, I mean local programming, local marketing, people on the ground producing television and film in those countries. And I think that's just going to be the future for us.
I'll ask another question, which is definitely related to digital entertainment, and that's how you compensate stars. And with the move towards digital and direct to home and direct to streaming, before stars used to be compensated by box office receipts. How is this going to change, if it is going to change? And we just saw the recent Scarlett Johansson settlement with Disney around that. So if you can comment, I don't know, Mike, you might be able to comment on that.
Yeah, I think I mean it's a complicated topic. I think we're in a transition period of time now, though, where you have, in that instance, my understanding is you had a contract signed with a previous expectation of how a film might be released and whatnot. And as you go forward and as we commission films straight to streaming, I know as Netflix and others do the same, I think it's important that when you're upfront about how you're going to distribute something and the talent know exactly what you're going to do and you make those agreements in a fair way, I don't think you're going to have the same kinds of frictions that we saw. And we might see some more as this unwinds over the next few years. But much like we saw in television, television was compensated in a similar way. Obviously, they didn't have box office. You had back end, and you had a lot of different windows that TV shows would go through over time. What's really happened is you've collapsed the window for a lot of this, right? You're going to be on Prime Video or Netflix or Disney Plus for 20 years with a show or a film, and they're not going to it's not going to get resold multiple times, creating profits. So I think as long as we're fair up front with our talent and partners, we're going to be just fine. Ultimately, we just want to make great content for our customers.
Fritz.
Right. My one thing that I'm very curious about is when you're, back to, and again, this is probably a little bit more of a Mike question, but when determining which films and shows to greenlight, how important a factor is choosing stories from historically underrepresented communities, and then hiring a diverse cast and crew?
Yeah, and I'm picking up from a question from the audience. Anna Layla asked the question, what obligation does the entertainment industry have to create representative programming and promotion of social justice, in her words? So that dovetails with Fritz's question.
Mm-hmm.
And do you want to go first on that one? I'm happy to
Yeah,
take that
sure.
too.
I think there's a profound obligation, because you're looking, if you are and intend to be a global platform, you have to embrace the idea that every story and everyone's story matters. And I look at the fantastic array of documentaries that Netflix has done on so many subjects and so many people who were underrepresented and unknown and are now known. And I think these streaming services, have that great ability.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anne. I think there's a big obligation. I think it's also a big opportunity as well. We just finished moments ago talking about international and expansion and local storytelling. I think that's the same both domestically in the US and it's also around the world. You want to be telling stories about where people are coming from. You want to tell stories with writers and actors and people in front and behind the camera that reflect the communities you're serving. And because I think many of these businesses are underrepresented with their customer base, it's really important that we actually make content that makes sense for those communities. And I think we're fully committed to it. We're investing quite a bit in programming for the underserved audiences in the U.S. and around the world. And I think we'll continue to do that. And you'll see that coming. We've already had quite a bit of content that we've put out over the last couple of years, and it'll accelerate over time.
And how about the crews and the creative talent that goes into it? How much is that a factor in your diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives?
Yeah, we have our creative teams are staffed not just with creative executives and marketing teams, but also DEI. We look at every project through that lens, and we're looking at not only the customer segmentation that I mentioned before, but we're looking at the cast in front of the camera. We're looking at the writing talent behind, as well as the folks on the crew. And we're trying to be representative. We would like to reflect the communities we're serving. And you can't do that well unless you actually have the people on staff doing the work. And so we take it really, really seriously.
Another question that has come from the audience, and Andrea has touched on that too, and that is there, with all of these streaming services, and I could rattle off quite a few, some of them are new, Peacock, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney, AT&T, Netflix, Paramount, Prime Video, obviously Netflix. Is there going to come a point that there is market saturation of streaming services? And how do you compete? One of the audience questions was, do you compete by having a certain tone in what you're delivering, or do you try to be all things to all people? And one of the questions around the certain tone was, do we want to have, are we going to see more of the Ted Lasso type, happier, warmer, kinder tone in what is being produced? So talk about the saturation of the streaming services and how do you differentiate?
Well, I think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Anne.
I'm sorry. Mike and I both grew up during the boom of the cable industry. And, we were working in an industry that had 500 channels. And not all of them were viewed. People, Mike, I don't remember the number, but people had between 10 and 13 channels that they would check out on a fairly regular basis. So I think it's a little bit like watching the same movie twice. We're seeing now we're at 200 streaming services, and, not all of them will survive. I think the ones that will survive are the ones that super serve their viewers, that, really provide tremendous entertainment, really make an investment in the viewer, in movies, in series, some of them in live programming. As for the Ted Lasso, boy, it was such a nice moment. I think I enjoyed every single episode. I waited for Fridays to see it, but I don't think it's a bellwether. I think it's an excellent show and certainly deserved every Emmy that it won.
I have to tell you about Ted Lasso as somebody who taught leadership in my prior life, and both of you were wonderful guests there. I felt it was just an amazing lesson in leadership, in addition to kindness. I
Yes.
would have taken a lot of those clips. Mike, what's your thinking about the segmentation versus, or fragmentation versus saturation, and how do you differentiate?
Yeah, I think I agree completely with what Ann just said. You had, you had all these different brands of cable networks over the last 30 years, and as that business starts to go sideways and probably down a bit, customers still like food, and they like health, they like home, they like these different segments of content, and I think those that can, as Ann said, super serve audiences. I think I give you one example. When I was at Sony, we had an Japanese anime business called Funimation, and they subsequently bought Crunchyroll as well to put both of those two services together. And in that area, what we really thought about is how do we super serve the anime fan? And in television terms, it would have been lots of great TV shows and films. But in that world, it's not just TV shows and films, it's merchandise, it's lifestyle, it's really getting 360 with your customer. And I think those businesses that can figure that out are going to have great, long, enduring businesses. But those that don't, I think, as Ann said, they'll fall to the wayside. And the last thing I'd say on that is, it seemed hard at the time, but in retrospect, it is a lot harder now when you're literally direct to consumer. You have to be valuable enough every month for the credit card not to be pulled off your account. People are calling their credit card list every month, looking at which subscriptions they're using and not using. In the old world of this big basic cable bundle, you could be a cable network with 97% of consumers not ever turning your channel on, and you still had 100% of the customers. And so this world's changed quite a bit. And those that can adapt to this sort of daily, monthly, weekly consumption pattern with customers are the ones that are going to survive. And it's better for customers, I think, ultimately, because they're going to get better products, but it's going to be a learning curve for many, many companies.
Oh, well said.
Fritz, you want to take the next one?
Sure. Well, I was also just thinking about, just to jump on the Ted Lasso bandwagon, what an uplifting show. My wife and I also very much love that show, and you just kind of feel, sometimes you'll be between something that's wonderful, like a money heist and a Squid Game, or a Ted Lasso, and it all depends on kind of where you want to go. But that's the beauty of film. But I do wonder, I'm really curious as to what you two would think about, in terms of content contextually, because we're obviously have gone through and are still going through a pandemic. Do you feel, I think, Ann, you were kind of leaning towards, I'm not sure that Ted Lasso is a bellwether of like new content in that kind of more wholesome, less violent, less hard R. But I don't know, do you guys think there's going to be a reaction to the pandemic in terms of comedy is really going to come back, or it hasn't started to come back? Or?
Well, I think if we, go backward and look at the, when was this developed? This was developed pre-COVID. The first season was shot pre-COVID. So this was in some, and this was a character that had appeared during the Olympics. This was, wasn't he a character in a promo? So this was conceived long before, this was actually conceived during, at a time in our country when there were harsh conversations going on about politics. So I don't know, but my sense is that it could have been a reaction at that time to what was going on in the world and the way people were talking to each other. certainly the timing of the premiere could not have been better. And the way they've proceeded, the way they've built out those characters, I think the storytelling has been fantastic. And, they even left us with a cliffhanger for next season. Mike, I don't know.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, I think it is useful to look backward a little bit on these things, because I'll use we in the broadest sense, tend to flock at, the same things. And we if, oh gosh, this was a hit, so a bunch of people will try to come out with uplifting comedies probably right now. There's probably a lot of that development. But as Ann said, it takes a couple of years from the time you do that until you start to see the TV show on a screen somewhere, usually. And so I think it's smart to just try to be diversified in how you're looking at it. And some customers tonight will want to see something uplifting and funny, and others will want to get dark and see a horror film, right? So I think you have to have a lot of content for each mood and each customer taste that's out there to be successful.
I want to ask you about a new development that Amazon is getting into, and that's Thursday night football in terms of live TV. And Anne alluded to this other model of delivering streaming, and that was once a week, going back to appointment TV, where Friday night, you wanted to see something, you had to be in front of the television. So this notion that it isn't anytime, anywhere, but that you have appointment TV or live, how do you see that converging with the consumer traditions now and consumer habits now of 3 a.m, I'm going to see this no matter what? Mike, why don't you start on that one,
Sure.
since you're the Thursday night TV guy?
Sure. I think it just depends. I think we're not all the same, and we're not all the same every day, right? So I think sometimes you want to be, binging something over, a long weekend. Other times you want to be in a conversation in community with others, and that could be because you want to all gather to watch the big show on Sunday night, or it could be that you want to root for your favorite team, or it could be that you want to gather together to watch, gather meaning either together or virtually together to watch an award show and see what's happening there. And I think it just depends. I think all of these things have a place. News is live. News happens. Elections happen at a certain time, and watching the election coverage on demand 3 weeks later isn't all that satisfying. And so I think you want to try to bring as much variety to customers as possible and be where they are in the moment. And so for us, when we looked at Thursday night football and sports in general, and we've had sports for quite a while. We have English Premier League rights in the UK, and Champions League soccer in Germany and Italy, and Liga One in France. And we do a few more things, and we're going to do more. It's that one moment where people come together to watch the game, and I think that's great for a streaming service to be able to offer that for customers. And it gives us this, we sort of get a chance to aggregate viewers at one moment, which you just haven't been able to really do with streaming so far.
And
it's interesting. I was listening to Mike and thinking about consumer behavior, and just as we've known what time Monday Night Football will be on, people will know what time Thursday Night Football is on. It's just a matter of how they're going to, what device they're going to watch it on. I mean, the good news is, the availability is a lot easier, but yeah, I don't see it as something unexpected. Instead, I see it as something that, well, of course, Amazon would have Thursday Night Football. And I think it's because I'm thinking about these platforms now, not as networks, but as entities with a lot more functionality.
There's a question here from Stefan, and I think this is an interesting question. What do you think the future is for kids programming? What types of content are you marketing to that age group, given that most kids spend more time online, on YouTube, social media over traditional cable or broadcast TV shows, or even traditional streaming? And that's, I know those are your roots.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan, for asking that question. Honestly, my favorite thing to talk about is what happens to kids programming in this age. And I think a couple of things happen. I think there is an ability to create more and always create better. I think we'll know a lot more about kids and consumption and what they're learning. I remember in the early days of putting Disney Channel programming on the, get this, video iPod. So yes, Judy was right, 2005. We actually went into people's homes to see how kids were interacting with this. And I'll never forget, our researchers went into one house and there was a big screen TV on one wall. And the kids were cuddled up on the couch together, watching a kid's show together on a little video iPod. Now, I think because devices are more available now, a lot of the cost has come down. I just think it's an opportunity to learn more. I think it's an opportunity for the educational sector to really take a look at what is going on and how we can use this knowledge to make better programming for kids.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Anne has forgotten more about kids programming than I'll never know. So I hazard to follow that. I think, but I think Anne's right. I think the one thing is, Anne, this is kids, but it's all programming, is that the number of screens available today for people to consume. I mean, you think back 30 years ago, how many homes had more than one TV or had more than two TVs? Now, not only do you have those plus a few more, everybody's got a smartphone, iPads, computer. There's so many different. So programming is more of a one-to-one experience now in many instances, including kids. Whereas before it was a communal experience in the living room. And I think that's had a lot of impacts on how we all do business and how people consume media and entertainment, and kids most of all, I think, because I've got a 17-year-old and she only watches TV and films on her computer in her bedroom, right? So she's not quite a kid anymore. But when I was 17, that wasn't how I was consuming content. So I think it's just an interesting dynamic, just in terms of how distribution and screens have changed, and then programming is following that.
Chris.
Okay. If you had to choose, which is your number one and number two factor in betting on your next big hit? Okay, so if you had to choose, I know it's impossible to choose, but would it be the creator or the writer, the director, the stars, the budget, the story, or some focus group, analytics, accounting algorithm?
I have always, in my past, bet on the writer.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Anne. It's the writer. I put many of the other things as a close second, because while writer I think is most important, there's a bunch of ways you can screw that up between the written word and the screen. But what is, I think, true is you can't fix a broken script very easily, if ever. And so I agree. I think the writing is the most important.
So let's pick up on a bit. Well, Fritz would agree because he's a writer. Let's pick up on Fritz's question in that last piece. The analytics. how do the analytics factor in choice of project now? And I know it keeps getting more and more sophisticated. In fact, we've just introduced a new degree in the School of Communications, which is on entertainment analytics. So talk about how you use that. And I maybe start with Anne, because Netflix has really been one of the real iconic users of analytics.
Well, you're right, Judy, they are. And I think what the analytics do is to help you understand how people are using your service, what they're watching, when do they tune in, when do they tune out? It's a lot of great information, but it doesn't tell you what to make next. And it doesn't tell you, what is, what's a good script, who's a good talent, who, is ready to break through. That's why you have incredibly talented people who run content, at Netflix, like Ted Sarandos and Bella Bajaria. These are, people who, use the information that they're getting, but also are reading the scripts and finding the talent and seeking out the new directors and really paying attention to, what's going on in the world. We don't want to make another X because there are 5 of them right now. What's something that will really create a great experience for people? What will delight them next?
Mike?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was surprised, Anne, you didn't say that there was an algorithm that Squid Games popped out of. But I agree. I think it's interesting if you also look back at, each of these big services has had a hit, a first one that put them on the map, and we can all probably rattle them off together. And I can just go back to The Handmaid's Tale at Hulu, right? We thought that was there was no analytics that said that would be a hit, much less a defining show for that brand.
Right.
But you had to trust the creators. You had to, you trusted your team. You had a bit of a strategy behind it, but you couldn't have found an algorithm or data underneath it to support that. So I do think it helps you learn, right? You can learn a lot about what you've already created, but I'm not sure it can really pick things for you. Unfortunately, I wish there was an algorithm we could create. That would be awesome.
How, and this is a question from John, is there some reverse engineering that it would at least tell you that these types of shows are the ones that we should seek out to buy, to broadcast? Does it, if it doesn't tell you, okay, this show is going to be a hit, does it at least steer you towards audience preferences?
I'd say it does it can provide some direction. I think we found that you can realize that you are under sort of supported in a category, right? If you can see that you've got not enough comedy or you've got too much horror, for example, right? Based on the data, and then you can adjust your spending in certain ways in what you're developing. But there's a couple factors that make it hard, right? We talked about how long it takes to actually get something made. So that, and so everything in the data is looking backward, but yet you've got a 18-month to 2-year window from first time you say yes to something until you get it on screen. So the data could change, between now and then. So I think it's directional, it helps, but I can't say that it's absolute.
I agree.
So as we're getting towards the end, unfortunately, we have lots more questions that we could be asking. We have to talk about your backgrounds, how you got into the industry, and how you might advise students today of getting into the industry. And I did mention, and we'll get to Mike in a moment, that he started out on the penny savers as a sales guy, which most of you don't even know what penny savers are. But let's start with you, Anne, because you came at this from a totally different field. And talk about today, how you might get into the field.
Well, yeah, I mean, I my first job in television was as a page at ABC. So think Kenneth from 30 Rock, the jackets, the whole thing. And that was one of the paths in. The path was you're going to work in every single aspect of AB. You go where you're sent. So maybe you're in the green room for Good Morning America. Maybe you're working a game show. Maybe you're working local news, national news. I
How
think
did you get that first job though, to get into being the page?
To get into being a page, I knew a page. And I went to an all-girls college and I did a lot of theater. And we used to joke that we rented guys, but there was a guy who was in one of our plays and he showed up for rehearsal wearing a jacket that had an ABC patch on it. And I said, "Oh, wow, where did you get the jacket?" And he said, "Oh, I'm a page. It's the greatest job in the world." And I said, "Oh, how do you get to be a page?" He said, "Well, why don't you, come down to 66th Street and fill out an application and, interview." But it's not that easy now. I mean, the way in, I think, is a lot more complicated. But I think, if I were doing it all over again, I think I would, given what I know now, if I wanted to go into the business of television, I'd make sure that I worked on both sides. I'd make sure that I spent time in a studio, really understanding how things are made, what they cost, how you cast talent, how a writer's room works. And then I would go in, I'd make sure I got to the other side of the equation and experienced everything from, developing programming, which is, still an activity that people do at networks and at streaming services, and seeking material. I think that, to me, the game, or the absolute most important thing right now, is finding great content and getting it made. So I would make sure I took time to be on both sides of that.
Right?
Yeah, I think, gosh, how I got in, you talked about the penny saver. I got out of college and got into sales. That was pretty much the only job I could get, was getting into certain types of sales. And so I did that for a few years, and I kind of got lucky personally. I got a call from a friend that was at, lo and behold, the Anderson School at UCLA. I think you've heard something about that, Judy. And he had a friend that was looking for a salesperson at the Weather Channel, selling the cable network up and down the West Coast to cable systems. And I was able to get the job. And that was kind of like my foot in the door. As weird as that sounds, because it sounds nothing like what I do today. But I got, that job, and then I was able to meet some people at Fox and ended up at Fox. And then I was there for 18 years in a variety of different roles. But like Ann said, I think it's easier now, I think, in a weird way, to get exposure to both sides of the business. Back then, it was so arcane and hard to really figure out what was going on in the world. Today, just with the advent of the internet, I mean, there wasn't really the internet when I started. You can learn a lot. You can experiment yourself as a creator. You can learn a lot, and I would encourage anybody trying to get into the industry there's so much more you can do on your own to learn, that can display to whoever you're talking to, whether you've met somebody through a friend, or you've happened into a conversation with somebody that might be the one that can give you the job. I think if you can display that curiosity and hunger because of the things you've done on your own, I think that will help set you apart, whether it's reading, whether it's creating your own YouTube channel, whatever it is that gets you interested. I think when I'm looking to hire someone, and when my teams are, they're really looking for the hunger and the desire and the passion. And so it's hard to display that if you haven't actually done a lot. And I think doing as much as you can on your own and at this time, I think would be something I'd really recommend.
And it sounds like both of you are saying, get your foot in the door however you can, and
Yes.
then excel.
Yeah.
And
Right.
people will then notice you. And
Yes,
then you can move around.
Right.
100%.
So
Absolutely.
Fritz, the last question to you.
All right. Thank you, Judy. Final question. Any sneak peeks or tips you can give us on new productions on the horizon for either of you? What should we be on the lookout for?
Sure.
Well,
Go ahead, Ann. Go ahead, Ann.
I don't have sneak peeks, but I have a couple of must-sees right now. So Squid Game, absolutely. It's a global conversation. You'll be able to talk to many people and many countries about this show. Colin in Black and White, absolutely. And just if you had never seen it or hadn't seen a lot of episodes, go back and look at the genius writing of 30 Rock. You know, because it's funny, Ted Lasso got me back into to comedies again, and I found 30 Rock, and I'm really enjoying how well written it is and funny.
Mike?
So I have a few sneak previews or things that we're excited about anyway. We have two movies coming up in the next month. One is called The Tender Bar, directed by George Clooney and starring Ben Affleck. Really good. I've seen it a couple times. I hope you'll enjoy that one. And speaking of IP, and this is a different way to get to IP, we have an awesome movie coming called Being the Ricardos. It stars Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem. Aaron Sorkin directed it. If you have any idea what I Love Lucy was, or please go watch a couple episodes, check this out. It's really spectacular, so well done. I think you'll really enjoy that one. And then next week we launch Wheel of Time, big world that we've created, a big genre series that is based on the best-selling Robert Jordan novels. Really excited about that. And then little less than a year from now, we're going to go to Middle Earth and unveil our new epic Lord of the Rings series. So four things to look ahead to for us in the next year or so.
Fantastic. We'll watch them.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. It was wonderful to see you both again. And we really admire what you've done in the digital entertainment space, both of you, with the amazing careers that you have. And I know that everyone who's watching, with all of the questions that they ask, they want to be Ann and Mike somehow. So thank you so much for all of the joy that you've created for us along the way. And good night, everyone. Thanks for the engagement and the great questions. And thank you, Fritz.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.